The journey of caring for a loved one who is living with dementia can be quite challenging. The aim of this podcast is to make caregiving less daunting and more fulfilling. On this platform, we share knowledge, understanding, and experiences. We enlighten, give hope, and encourage, and in the process, create positive awareness about different aspects of dementia. Welcome to my podcast, Dementia Caregivers Corner. My name is Julia Ratladi. Dementia Care, how deep is your love?
In today's episode, I'm truly honored to be joined by Professor Andrea Tales. Professor Tales holds a personal chair in neuropsychology and dementia research at Swansea University. She's also a fellow of the British Psychological Society and a fellow of the Learned Society of Wales. Professor Tales co-authored a research-based book titled A New Approach to Dementia, examining sensory and perceptual impairment. She and her colleagues believe that while cognitive changes in dementia are well recognized, the significant sensory changes that often accompany the condition have received far less attention in the design of supportive technologies and environments. This oversight, they believe, has led to solutions that may not fully address the complex needs of people living with dementia. So today, we'll be discussing two key sensory impairments. One, visual dysfunction in dementia and cognitive decline. And the second one, the role of environmental design and smart technology in supporting people living with dementia. Welcome to Dementia Caregivers Corner podcast, Doctor. I always talk to doctors.
Oh, it's okay. Just Andrea is fine. And you know what? It's an absolute honour and pleasure to be speaking with you as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Every opportunity that I get to talk dementia-related issues, I jump into it. Let's get into it. You and your team of researchers, you are challenging the traditional view of looking at dementia as primarily a memory disorder. You are saying that instead there are changes in sensory perception, such as vision, sight, touch, that are very, very important, yet they are overlooked by healthcare professionals. So I want you to talk to us. What do you mean by that? That's number one. Number two, and why is it important for us to broaden our understanding of dementia beyond just memory care or memory loss?
The important thing is that everybody's different. So people are living with different types of dementia at different stages. And not everybody living with dementia will experience some of these sensory and perceptual changes. However, some people will. And that is really, really important. And it's not to downgrade or say memory and cognitive changes aren't important. They are massively important for how they affect our experience of living with dementia and our interaction with the environment. What I found, though, because I've been doing vision and attention research for over 20 years, is that there's such a lot of research information about sensory and perceptual changes, about taste, about smell, about vision and hearing, proprioception, touch, in the academic literature. But we as members of the public, because I consider myself both, don't always get to know about that information. And my colleagues and I thought how important it is to improve our understanding of living with dementia ourselves, but of the person we might be providing caregiving to, a person living with dementia and a caregiver, is what might be contributing to a person's signs and symptoms. Why might they be behaving in a certain way in a certain environment? And some of that behaviour and experience will be to do with changes in memory and cognition and thinking skills and planning skills. But we wanted to raise awareness based on research work, peer-reviewed, published research that indicates that some people, not everybody, and I really want to emphasise that, not everybody, might be experiencing changes not just in the way their eyes and ears work, but how that vision and hearing is interpreted by the brain. Because, sorry, I realise I'm rambling on. Is this okay? Shall I carry on? Right.
No. I'm just here to ask you one question, and I want you
right.
to.
Okay.
That's the time, yes.
And the way that this happens sometimes is that as we get older, there are normal age-related changes to our eyes and our ears. So we expect some changes. So most people who are older, who are living with dementia, will also be living with some changes in their sight and their hearing. And it's really important that that gets taken account of, and we get glasses checked and we get hearing aids checked, because an interaction and experience is much better if we can see and hear properly. But the other important thing is that changes can happen in our brain with different types of dementia. And some dementias, for example, Alzheimer's disease, might affect some areas of the brain that are responsible for processing all that visual information, all that hearing information. And if our brain isn't processing that information properly, it can be really confusing. And we might mishear, we might not see things properly, we might misperceive, and we might even get hallucinations. And that might be true of all our senses. Some people might have changes in their touch, their sense of smell and taste. And all of those things can really affect how you interact with each other, how you experience dementia, your everyday life, your quality of life. It can be really, really lonely if you can't see or hear properly or perceive all of those sensory things around you. Yeah. And I think that's what we wanted to emphasize to people, is that if we know that somebody, perhaps they might be feeling a little bit down, and that might be because they can't see or hear properly, or experience hallucinations or misperceptions that can be really distressing sometimes for people. You might not understand what they are, and it can be really difficult for a person not with dementia, as well as a person with dementia, trying to explain those changes, those experiences. And I think we all know that sometimes people living with Alzheimer's, for example, might get misperception, and somebody might see a shadow or a carpet and misperceive that as a whole and step over it. Yeah, because depth perception isn't working very well.
Actually, that was my next question.
Oh. Sorry.
So,
I'm racing ahead.
So let me just interject you there, because I cared for this lady. She lived with vascular dementia. Towards the end of her life, it was now diagnosed as mixed dementia. But, when it was time for her shower, she would be so much distressed. What happened, or what I realized later on, was that there was a carpet, a navy blue carpet, between her bathroom and her bedroom. So when it was time for a shower, she would scream, and we didn't know what the problem was until I read an article or a book, I think by Wendy Michel. You must know the late Wendy Michel. And that's where I found that. She said in her book that she perceived black color as a sinking hole.
Yes, yeah.
I want you to expand more on that. What changes would have occurred in their brain to react as such? And from a visual processing perspective, what might she has been experiencing? I want to understand, because it didn't make sense that time.
It's really complex, and lots of people report very different experiences like that. And the parts of the brain that process visual information, that allow us to perceive, allow us to see and understand our environment, are in part in separate areas of the brain. And we have areas of the brain and neurons, brain cells, that will process colour, depth, movement. And if any dementia-related pathology affect those areas and cause the brain cells to break down, the axons and neurons to break down, then that normal behaviour is interrupted. So that visual information interacts with our consciousness and we say, oh yes, that's a shadow, I can tell that's a shadow, and we think nothing of it. If that process is interrupted because part of the brain is disrupted because of pathology, then it can't talk to each other. So the part of the brain might not be able to process that information anymore, and another part of the brain, because it's not having the right information, it can't process it correctly. So although we're seeing a shadow, the brain, our consciousness is disconnected from that, and we don't see it as a shadow, we see it as a whole. I'm sorry, that it's so complex.
Yes, but I'm understanding.
Yeah. And it's the same with motion. You know, we've got an area in our brain that is really specialised for processing motion. So, for example, how fast the car might be going.
Mm-hmm.
And if that area isn't working very well, nor all its connections to the other areas of the brain that give us conscious perception of that isn't working, then we might not see how fast the car is travelling. We might not be able to tell, if we're playing sport, how fast the ball is coming to us. So we can't interact with the environment. And some people living with dementia report that they just can't tell how fast the car is going. So they're scared to go out. Quite naturally, you know, or might need some assistance. And I think what struck me was that if we don't ask people for their experiences, we might not know about these changes in perception and vision. Mm-hmm. So I, like you say about talking about dementia, I think it's really important that all of us maybe talk to a person with dementia and say, can you know, what's happening? How do you see things? It won't be possible with everybody, but it's a thought, isn't it? That, you know, maybe we ask some of these sensory and perceptual related changes.
When you were explaining, what I could see in my mind was danger. When you're talking about them not perceiving how fast the car is, I could see danger. When they are not seeing how far or the speed of a ball, I'm seeing danger around me. And I'm here thinking, but people don't know. The public don't know that.
I think to some extent it's quite rare and not everybody will experience this. And I don't think caregivers and the NHS and health providers are ignoring it. I think they're becoming more aware of it. And now, for example, if somebody goes for cognitive testing, very often, if not always, people will have their vision and their hearing tested, and people will ask more questions about it because there's a lot of information now in the academic papers coming out. So I think people are aware of it.
Yes.
And I think it's also important for the general public and caregivers and people living with dementia to know about it so they can maybe ask questions and also think about that might be why things are happening. If somebody's not eating properly, for example, it might be memory, it might be lots of other things related to dementia. It might be that people perceive what they used to really enjoy food-wise as tasting horrible. And that can happen and people will not want to eat. And it's just raising that awareness.
Yes, you and I have access maybe to our university libraries where I have access to peer-reviewed articles. How about an ordinary person? How do we intend to spread this, to create awareness in that regard for the people who have no access to these peer-reviewed articles?
Absolutely. And I feel really strongly about that. And I think we try and get info. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's partly why we did the book. And we importantly involved, it was co-produced by people living with dementia who were experiencing these things, because they have been the most fantastic voice for people living with these perceptual and sensory changes. And I like to get some information from the academic side of things out there in a way that people in everyday life, people can understand those findings and what they might mean. Because some of these scientific papers, they're a bit too in-depth, a bit too, they're not immediately getting the information out there. So I'm hoping that we go out to conferences, we go to public meetings.
And we try to use layman language.
I know. I'm trying. I'm a little bit hesitant sometimes because I'm trying to use language that isn't scientific, but it's quite difficult for a scientist not to do that. So I do apologise.
I know what you mean. I come from Botswana. It's in southern part of Africa. And I have seen or I have read articles that we don't have the word dementia in our language. So it's hard for me to explain it or to describe it to our people. And I was actually speaking with one gentleman who lives with dementia in the US. He believes that the word should be changed because it's got stigma attached to it. He has a book he calls it The Dancing Dementia Dude. So he, in our conversation, he just addressed dementia as the dance. Like, to him, it's changed. So yes, it's hard to translate or interpret scientific terms into like your normal, ordinary language, everyday language. Yes. So then, tell me, how would you like the healthcare providers to incorporate these assessments into their overall evaluation of people living with cognitive impairment? I know you mentioned something like that. We have to talk to them and find out from them. And then I don't know whether you are able to give us maybe one or two examples of the vision assessment that is used for people living with dementia and what exactly they help to evaluate.
The person who wrote the chapter in the book is a vision specialist, is an ophthalmologist, and I think he's going to do a podcast with you, so it can give you lots and lots of fantastic information.
Great.
So usually now what happens when somebody goes to a health caregiver is that they'll be asked about, have they been to an optician's and have they had their hearing checked? And if not, then I think people are advised to go and have that done, because it's very difficult, isn't it, when you're seeing somebody and they're going to be assessed for dementia, to have too many tests all at once. Yes. So I think probably they will be referred to a specialist, and it might be the same for taste and smell. So a caregiver might, or a clinician might say, have you noticed any of these changes with your touch, your smell, your taste, your hearing, or your sight? And if so, maybe preemptive tests can be given so you can find out about somebody's status, if you like, before they go on to have the cognitive tests. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that you can do quick tests, in a memory clinic, and you might find that somebody has cataracts or something. And it's important to realise that if somebody does have changes in their vision and their hearing, they might do more poorly on a cognitive test simply because they can't see or hear the questions, so they don't give the right answers. But I think people know about that now, so they will take account of that. But they might not be aware that things like taste and smell and touch changes can occur. And they can cause hallucination, they can cause people to be anxious or cause some degree of depression sometimes, and loneliness. And I think it's a case of, again, asking people and maybe their caregiver, and if necessary, maybe referring them to a specialist. It's very difficult for me to say because I'm not a clinician, I'm not a medic, but my colleagues, I think, will give a much fuller answer to that.
On that, when you're talking like that, my mind ran to a care home, and I'm thinking, would they be able to pick up that Lady A is not enjoying food option A, and let's try to change? Because that, to me, I think it's possible when it's just you and me. You are my mom, I'm caring for you. But how about when we are in a care home? Are they able to pick that up, Professor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's when it comes down to, does this academic research work in real life? And maybe it's about, again, asking those questions and maybe saying to a person who's a caregiver, noticing that somebody isn't eating a particular food or eating at all, just wondering why and changing the food, or asking the person, are you not enjoying it? It depends on so many factors, doesn't it? And, that's a whole new area of research. How do we implement these findings into real life? How do we say, okay, what's the procedure? If we think somebody's not eating or they're behaving in a different way, how do we find out if it's to do with sensory and perceptual changes or something else?
There's a lot. My mind is always running. Just bear with me there. It's going back to this lady that I cared for. She had a big clock in her kitchen, and I would ask her, like, what time is it? She'll be looking at it, but she'll just say random numbers. So it's now that I'm thinking, that means that her vision was affected, right? Because it was a huge clock, like a size of a laptop.
Again, it could be lots of different things. It could be memory. It could be difficulties with so many different aspects. But and it might be to do with vision and perception, or it might be that somebody can't tell the time anymore. They can have other attentional problems. And ideally, people would have tests, and there are tests you can do to see if people are misperceiving or their sensory function isn't working. But it's getting those tests to people who are living in care homes and different environments to find out exactly. It's about bespoke care, isn't it? And bespoke medicine and healthcare. It's not assuming that nobody has these changes, nor is it assuming that everybody has them, but it's on a personal basis. For example, a person might have changed their behaviour, and unless you do all these tests or ask all these questions, you won't know whether it's to do with memory, whether it's to do with misperception, whether it's just because they no longer taste in the same way. So some things taste horrible and you just have to change the type of food. And ideally, you would ask all these questions and do all this testing and say, this person here, this is their, I can't think of the word, but their profile, if you like. This is what's happening to this person. And you might well find if we could do things like that, it isn't just about memory and cognition. Even asking, do your glasses work anymore? Is a hearing aid okay? And asking people who care for those people as well, have they noticed any changes? And their relatives and friends, how has their behaviour changed compared to what it used to? Did they used to like this food but don't suddenly like this food, for example? That's a very, very difficult question to answer.
Yes, but you are making sense. Obviously, it can be overwhelming. I mean, these tests, that I wish we could have just a magic pill to say tap once and we are done, just like that. But really, we have to sensitize the people, the public, to avoid situations or where our people, our loved one who are living with dementia gets in tricky situation or in dangerous environments, you see. Because I'm just thinking, if they cannot perceive smell, for example, and they say a gas leak, what is going to happen?
That's a really, really good point. And one thing to do is to raise awareness of some of the assistive and smart technology that is out there for people with different sensory changes. There are, if you have visual problems, there are auditory alarms, sound alarms for things like gas leaks or water overflowing in the bath. And they can warn people visually. If you have hearing problems or hearing loss, then you can get visual signs in your home that you can have fitted in your home to say there's somebody at the door or this is happening. There's so much technology that is potentially available to people who have sensory changes.
Oh, yes, I was coming there as well. I think it was my next question, really. I've read in your book, you mentioned something that the people living with dementia, their ability to navigate and understand their environment become particularly challenging, that their visual and spatial changes can make even familiar places feel unfamiliar. And I've seen real life situations whereby when they are moved into a new environment, they get so much confused. So what I want you to make us understand, how do you connect these two realities? They're in their home, they might get confused. They go out, they might get confused. So what I want you to tell us about their experience of space and familiarity and how we can best support them.
Gosh, that's another really challenging situation, isn't it? Because I would probably want to know what people do in their own caregiving situations with people who are experiencing that. And again, I think it's probably individual differences and everybody will have their own strategy. For some people might argue that reorienting is the right thing to do, and you might put notices on things, you might label things, and you might reorient somebody to say you are now in this environment. Because if you can't remember where you are, it's very, very difficult, isn't it, to address that. I'm not a specialist in this, so I'm a little bit hesitant to say, but you might get some familiar colours, or try and, if somebody's used to having a red wall or something, you might want to incorporate that into new areas, just to make people have a sense of home or a sense
Familiarity.
of familiarity.
Yes.
I've heard of people bringing familiar objects in, trying to not move things around too much.
Yes, that one. You can say that one again. So one day, sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking of this lady that I supported. She went out to a daycare center. I remained behind in the house. So I was trying to to make things happen, you see, and cleaning. And so when she came in, I said, "Look, Jen, look what I've done for you. Like, I've cleaned." Oh, Professor, she couldn't handle it. She got emotional. She cried. Like, I have changed her environment. I thought I was doing something good.
I really resonate with that. And one thing I'm wondering about, and again, I don't know about this, but our brain has what we call an automatic change detection system, and it's really sensitive. Sometimes we might not notice big changes that go on because we're distracted with attention. But sometimes you can tell, even if you're not attending to it, that something is different, something has changed. And we can be quite sensitive to that. And some of those areas of the brain that do that kind of processing might not be affected. So somebody might really notice that there's a change in their room just because the same pattern of contrast isn't there, the pattern of the room isn't there, it's been changed in some way. And somebody might not be able to say that, but they might notice that a change has occurred. Again, I'm speculating, I don't really know, but knowing how the brain works, it's so complex. And, people might have different types of memory impairment. You can have visual memory, auditory memory, memory for smell and taste. And maybe if one of those memory and sensory associations isn't working, you might rely more on the system that is working. So you might be able to introduce familiar smells. People often like to touch things, don't they, and get a really sense of well-being by touching things, smelling things that are really nice. And one thing that we found is that many people living with various types of dementia find it really difficult to live daily life in an environment that's too cluttered. So if there are too many objects, too much contrast, too much colour, that can be really, really difficult. And actually clearing away a lot of that clutter can really help. And maybe not having carpets or fabrics that are too patterned, that can really help. And maybe a sense of familiarity might be a certain object or two that in a much calmer environment might really stand out and might be a focus of attention. But again, I suppose without speaking with that person and maybe trying a few things in real life rather than just giving tests. So is this better for you? Can you see this better? Is this better for you to hear?
Yes.
Does it taste better? Again, it so depends on the person, doesn't it? And maybe people can't do tests like that, but we can gain some information by observing somebody in their everyday life and what they're avoiding and what they're finding difficult.
Yes. The challenging thing is that I've seen most cases where they do things for them instead of doing with them.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and then you won't really find out, will you, what's wrong and what a person can do. Because the brain also, I know that in some stages of dementia, it's very difficult to do things in a different way. But for some people in earlier stages, lots of brain functions are preserved to some extent. And by doing things a different way, people can still learn sometimes to do things a different way. And that's important to say.
Let's expand more on the Professor on the environmental design. I'm talking about this lady that I supported. She has lived in her house for more than 50 years, and she's diagnosed with dementia. So what are you saying about that in terms of environmental design? What must happen to her existing house? What must happen to the existing shopping mall? What must happen to the existing bus, public transport in order to accommodate the needs of this person?
Again, I think it's raising awareness of everybody, people who have shops, retail, public transport systems, and I think things are improving in those areas. It's not assuming that everybody has the same issues. It's not assuming that everybody with dementia has Alzheimer's. It's empowering people to be aware of the changes somebody might have. And it's getting people to help people. Maybe you need help on transport systems. Maybe you cannot hear because you've got hearing loss or hearing misperception. So you can't hear a certain bus is delayed, or this is a number that you need. But if you had visual information, or if you had both hearing and visual information, then that might really help somebody living with dementia, because their visual system might not be working very well, but they can use their hearing. So it's having multiple sources of information for people. And I know it is very difficult when the country doesn't have very much money to do these things. But imagine just if there's a person to help somebody with dementia who's there all the time, a help person to say, let me assist you. Let me do that. If you want to cross the road, there are some real design specialists out there. And I think I could put you in touch with somebody, because I've got a colleague called Charles Musselwhite who looks at the issues that people have when they're on public transport, like trains and buses, and is also an expert in the built environment. It's about things like not using carpets with stripes on, because if your contrast sensitivity, your shape perception isn't working very well, you can misperceive that and it can make you wobble and risk of falling. And it's about talking with architects and designers about the problems that people living with dementia might have. They might have visual problems, hearing problems, other issues, and then they can incorporate that.
And I'm thinking your colleague must be working with, especially new developments now. Take, for example, if I want to open a nursing home that is specifically for people with dementia, I think those are the people that we should involve from the inception.
That's right. And it's about co-producing the design of home, isn't it, with people who are actually living with dementia and maybe mild cognitive impairment and various stages of dementia and different types of dementia, because they all come with different signs and symptoms. And I think rather than looking in all the academic literature, which will give you background information about you need to watch out because these changes might occur, if you're an architect or a designer, if you're doing smart tech, you co-produce your ideas right from the very beginning and you ask people what they want. I think there's an assumption sometimes that people living with cognitive impairment and dementia actually can't say what they want or decide what they want and have a choice. So I don't think it's necessarily about somebody advising, saying, I've read these books and these papers, this is what you should do. It's saying, we're designing a new care home. These are the people we'd like to invite to use it. So we need to speak to those people about what they want. And caregivers as well, unpaid and paid caregivers who have probably noticed what happens with respect to people living with dementia and if they can't see or hear, and what kind of environmental design trigger difficulties for people. So I think we can learn more about speaking about real life issues, or as much as we can, reading scientific papers.
Yes. I wanted us to talk about something. There's this thing where I cared for another lady again, and the family would bring different devices to the house for their loved one to try. They would buy this, they would buy that. And when we're just talking about it, they'll be like, no, a friend has recommended this device for me. Or they will say, no, I follow certain people on social media and they were using the same. So I thought I should bring it to my mom. I want you to talk to us, to family caregivers who have no idea of what dementia is, who have no idea on how to navigate. We are learning how to navigate caregiving or giving care for someone who is living with dementia, how do they move away from this trial and error approach and make more informed decision, personal choices, instead of wasting money? Because there's a lot of money that is wasted by buying things that it's not needed.
Absolutely. And it's a real problem. And I know some people who are working on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to do at the moment because although some designers do this, not all designers will design something with a person living with dementia in mind. And often it's not future-proof. So as dementia progresses, the device doesn't work anymore because it's not suitable for that. So it's about informing designers of technology that they have to co-produce this technology right from the very start. They don't just assume this is what people could do with because they've got dementia. Talk to people and say, what are the kind of products that people want? Is it to help you know when somebody's at the door? Is it to know if a person hasn't got up from their chair for hours and hours, so there might be a problem and you need an alert system? Is it a reminder system? And part of that is finding people who maybe could be like consultants, so they would talk with the person with dementia and carers and family and say, right, let's make something bespoke for you. Let's find out what your needs are. And it's almost as if, I don't want to use the word assessment, but you find out what a person needs and what exactly they want. And then you might not be able to get something off the shelf to do that. You might have to have it designed for you, or you might have to have a piece of equipment that's altered in some way so that you can use it for your exact needs. Because if not, it's not going to work. Designers also have to realise that people living with dementia might be living with comorbidities. They might have arthritis, let alone not being able to see a piece of technology very well or see the screen or the display. And I know that people are looking into that because we do need somebody at that interface almost, don't we, between the person living with dementia and the caregiver and the person who can say, right, this is the kind of technology you need. And you might find descriptions on the web about this is available. It might suit you, it might not, but really somebody to go into a home. And maybe if you're in a care home, you invite people who are selling these products to say, okay, we're interested in your product. It might work for some people, but can you give us a demonstration and can we test it first? So that's what I think is needed, a system where you can trial something and then decide if it's good for you. And I think there are some organisations now and some universities and some developers who are setting up smart homes in the university that can mimic, if you like, somebody's home. Okay. And the person can come in and try out lots and lots of technology.
Wow.
I think that's something that's getting more common now. And I truly believe that will come in later, that they're realising all of these things now. So you'll be able to go to a smart home, maybe it's in a company or a university. Yeah. And we have the Owen Institute at Swansea University that's designed for that. It's a mock-up of a person's living room, their bedroom, sitting room, and bathroom. And the idea is that technology designers can come in, meet people living with dementia and older adults and design things from scratch. But also the idea was that people could go into that space, maybe rearrange it so it's similar to their own home and say, here's some technology, what do you think to this?
Oh, yes. I guess those are the, opportunities that exist in that space, right? Yeah.
But I don't think they're necessarily available for everybody yet. And so people, I absolutely agree, I think, are buying things that might not be suitable. Some may be suitable. It depends on so many factors, doesn't it?
Yes, because I'm just thinking that, okay, they have bought this thing, this device, and it's not working as they had intended it to work. And sometimes tempers flare, like, why are you not using this? Mom, I bought this for you, but you are not. Because at the back of your mind, we're thinking, I've spent money to buy this.
Yes, of course. Yes.
So, yes, that's how it is. Okay, so looking ahead now, Professor, do you see a future like where smart technology plays a dominant role in dementia care? Or you think that it should just be used as a supporting tool?
Do you know what? I think that might be down to personal choice, because I think personally it's always really good to have, people around other people. And I also really like technology, and some technology that's being developed will be fantastic. I know it will.
Mm.
There's an assumption sometimes that an older person or a person living with dementia isn't used to technology, but some people are. And some people might say, right, I'm really happy with this iPad. I'm happy with the sensors. I'm happy with this monitor. I can self-monitor my cognition, my health. And they will want, quite an automated system in their home to help them, to keep them as more independent if they want that. Whereas some people, I think, it's good to have that choice and will say, no, I don't want technology, I want a person. Because, there are robots, there are so many things. And some people, I think, will embrace that and others won't.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to remember that there's digital poverty, isn't there? Technology poverty. Not everybody knows about technology. Not everybody can afford it. And that's a big issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're going to produce this, it's got to be available for everybody, not just a few people. So I think there's quite a way to go. But if I'm honest, with my science head on, I think technology is almost limitless. And if we want it to, it can be a fantastic adjunct to personal care and independence. But people have got to have that choice. And there are all sorts of ethics, aren't there, about monitoring people, having all these systems in your home and all the data that comes along with it. So again, I think it will be personal choice.
Yes. Okay. Is there any other question that you think I might have asked you that will help our listeners that I did not ask as we come to the end of our chat?
I think it's really made me think. Honestly, some of the issues you've brought up have been fantastic and really make me realise that there's still this gap between real life and what we've found. Somebody needs to implement that. So I can't think of any questions. And as I say, my colleagues who are experts in some of these areas they'll really enjoy speaking with you. I don't think you've missed anything out.
Oh, yes, I know there are some questions that I've missed on here because there's a lot to talk about, really. We need people to be aware of. So let me take this time to thank you, Professor Andrea, for your time.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm really happy, if you've got any more questions, I can find out for you and ask my colleagues. But thank you so much for inviting me. It's a fantastic thing you do. Thank you.
Yes. Let me take this time to thank you, our dear listeners, for tuning into this episode. If you have enjoyed our conversation or are passionate about dementia care, please consider leaving a review and sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Your support helps us reach more and more people and raise awareness about dementia-related issues. Until next time, take care. Bye for now.
Dementia care. How deep is your love?